I want to turn to China with intelligence officials, as we mentioned, saying that the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January while it stockpiled medical supplies. In terms of international concealing, I assume you think they did that intentionally to keep as many masks for themselves as possible. Will there be some sort of retaliation?
So, Martha, you've got the facts just about right. We can confirm that the Chinese Communist Party did all that it could to make sure that the world didn't learn in a timely fashion about what was taking place. There's lots of evidence of that. Some of it you can see in public, right? We've seen announcements. We've seen the fact that they kicked journalists out. We saw the fact that those who were trying to report on this, medical professionals inside of China, were silenced. They shut down reporting. All the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the way communist parties operate. This is classic communist disinformation effort. That created enormous risk, and now you can see hundreds of thousands of people around the world, tens of thousands in the United States have been armed. President Trump is very clear. We're going to hold those responsible accountable, and we'll do so on a timeline that is our own.
And Mr. Secretary, have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence community continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan. Martha, you have to put this in context. Here's what's important, Martha. Here's what's important. The Chinese Communist Party had the opportunity to prevent all of the calamity that has befallen the world. And here we find ourselves today. You and I were talking about we haven't seen each other physically for a long time. That's true of people all across the world. This is an enormous crisis created by the fact that the Chinese Communist Party reverted to form, reverted to the kinds of disinformation, the kinds of concealment that authoritarian regimes do. Had those scientists been operating in America, they would have put this out, there would have been an exchange of ideas, and we would have quickly identified the kinds of things that needed to be done in response. Instead, China behaved like authoritarian regimes do, attempted to conceal and hide and confuse. It employed the World Health Organization as a tool to do the same. These are the kind of things that have now presented this enormous crisis, an enormous loss of life, and tremendous economic cost all across the globe. The Australians agree with that. You hear the Europeans beginning to say the same thing. I think the whole world is united, understanding that China brought this virus to the world. We tried to get a team in there. The World Health Organization tried to get a team in there, and they have failed. No one's been allowed to go to this lab or any of the other laboratories. There are many labs inside of China, Martha. This risk remains. This is an ongoing challenge. We still need to get in there. We still don't have the virus samples we need. This is an ongoing threat, an ongoing pandemic, and the Chinese Communist Party continues to block access to the Western world, the world's best scientists, to figure out exactly what happens. The Chinese Communist Party has refused to cooperate with World Health experts.
Well, I don't think there's any question about it. We wanted to go in. They didn't want us to go in early, very early. You'll see that because things are coming out that are pretty compelling now. So I don't think there's any question. Don't forget, China tried to blame it first on some of our soldiers. That turned out to not go too far. And I really got very upset with that. That was not right. And then they tried to blame it on Europe. I said, how did Europe get involved all of a sudden? You know, Italy suffered probably more than anybody per capita, but Italy, Spain, France now is on an additional lockdown. They've got tremendous problems. All of Europe, it's been a disaster. And, you know, when I put a ban on, those people went, for the most part, not here. And I'm not happy about this. It's terrible because it's life, whether it's here or Europe. But we put a ban on very early on China coming in. They went to Europe. Most of those people went to Europe. That's why Italy was so badly affected. And you just see what they're going through. China tried to blame Europe for this. No,
you told John Roberts the other day
China.
that you saw evidence that gave you a high confidence that the virus came from the Wuhan lab.
We're going to be
Not that it was created there, perhaps, but that it came from there.
At the right time, we're going to
illuminate any more about that?
Yeah, we're going to be given a very strong report as to exactly what we think happened. and I think it'll be very conclusive.
Is there any suggestion that it was anything nefarious or that it was just a mistake?
So I think personally, I think they made a horrible mistake, and they didn't want to admit it. We wanted to go in. They didn't want us there. Even World Health wanted to go in. They were admitted, but much later, not immediately. And my opinion is they made a mistake. They tried to cover it. They tried to put it out. It's like a fire. It's really like trying to put out a fire. They couldn't put out the fire. What they really treated the world badly on, they stopped people going into China, but they didn't stop people going into the USA and all over the world. So you could fly out of Wuhan, where the primary problem was, all of the problem, essentially, also where the lab is. But you could fly out of Wuhan and you could go to different parts of the world, but you couldn't go to Beijing and you couldn't go to any place in China. So what's that all about? In other words, they knew they had a problem. I think they were embarrassed by the problem, very embarrassed. And the case could be made. They said, hey, look, this is going to have a huge impact on China, and we might as well let the rest of the world, because the last people they want, we've had a great year against China prior to the virus coming. And I told you, 67 or so years, the worst economy they've had. Worst they've almost on record that they've ever had, because of my negotiations and because I taxed them on the product that they brought in. And by the way, they paid for that tax. It wasn't our people. They paid for that tax. They devalued their currency. But here's the thing. They allowed this to go into our country. They allowed it to go into other countries all over.
Does it change how you feel about President Xi? Does it change your relationship with him?
Look, I finished a trade deal that everybody said would be impossible to get. And not only a trade deal, it was a great deal for this country. But that was done months before the virus came. I'm not going to say anything. I had a very good relationship. He's a strong man. He's a tough man. But I had a very good relationship with him. But this should never have happened. This should never have happened. This virus should not have spread all over the world. They should have put it out. They should have let us and other people in other countries go in and put it out, because people knew it was happening.
Decidi que quero abrir outro canal no YouTube. E por quê? Primeiro, porque como algumas pessoas já estão há bastante tempo aconselhando-me, eu posso, como qualquer perder meu canal de uma hora para outra, por causa justamente do arbitrário, inclemente, errático e mais mutante que um vírus algoritmo do YouTube. Nessa ordem de coisas, prudentes são aqueles, e são muitos, que abrem um segundo e até um terceiro canal que funcione, ou bem como um backup, ou para compartilhar um conteúdo que não vai muito com a linha editorial, digamos assim, do primeiro canal. Vamos ao limes germânicos. Até lá.